Good afternoon. My name is David Bohm. I'm the chair of the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, also known as JCPA, and I'll be introducing today's webinar. JCPA is a national network hub of the Jewish Community Relations Network, comprised of 125 local JCRCs and 16 national Jewish agencies. JCPA comes together to grapple with the pressing issues of the day, build consensus, and then advocates with other interfaith and intergroup partners to build a just and pluralistic America and support efforts for Israel's peace and security. For the next hour, we will be discussing a current event that is top of mind for so many of us: political change and social unrest, the Arab minority, and Jewish-Arab relations in Israel. Just this Sunday, Israel inaugurated a new governing coalition. Historic for many reasons, this coalition stands out for bringing together parties spanning the political spectrum, ranging from Meretz on the progressive left to Naftali Bennett's Yamina, literally the word going to the right on the right. The coalition also includes, for the first time ever, an Arab party, Ra'am, suggesting as the dawn of a new political era for Israel's Arab citizens. Yet this coalition was sworn in only a few weeks after some of the worst escalations in Israel's Jewish-Arab relations, along with renewed fighting with Hamas. Sparked by escalations in East Jerusalem, Arab rioting in mixed cities, retaliatory Jewish vigilante attacks, and clashes with police sent shockwaves throughout Israel and amongst those of us here in the United States, in the Jewish community, and left many communities in fear. This webinar will ask how these events have affected Jewish-Arab relations in Israel and the potential that the new political constellation may take hold. Today, we will hear from our esteemed panel that will help us to have a clearer understanding of the big picture as they address the following issues. After the panelist presentation, we'll open up for Q&A. If you have a question, feel free to write your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of the webinar screen. I'd like to introduce you to Liron Shoham, who will be moderating the discussion today. Liron Shoham is Executive Director of the Interagency Task Force on Israeli-Arab Issues. Task Force is an educational organization created to provide professional and nonpartisan resources and learning opportunities about Arab citizens of Israel, the American Jewish community, and organizations within the Jewish community. Liron, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the JCPA for hosting this webinar, and thank you to our speakers for joining us today. We are delighted to have with us the new Israeli member of Knesset, Ghaida, Rinawie, Zoabi, along with Dr. Meir Elran, senior researcher at the INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies. I'm also joined by my task force colleague, Erica Shaps, who is behind the scenes. She'll be active on chat and Q&A to provide additional context and respond to questions that may not get surfaced in the conversation. We're hoping to hold this event as a semi-moderated discussion conversation with me asking our speakers broad questions first and then follow up with more specifics before integrating audience questions. So please feel free to post questions as we go, and I'll provide a little bit more detail about each speaker when I direct the first question to them. So with no further ado, because indeed this is a complex time and there's a lot of many of salient issues that we can cover. Ghaida, MK, Ghaida Rinawie Zoabi, first, congratulations. You became an MK for the first time in the April 2021 elections. You're the fourth candidate of Meretz list, which won 6 seats, and 2 of them are held by Arab citizens, you and MK Isawi Frej. Meretz is a left-wing social democratic and green party, and it's now part of this unprecedented government coalition. While this is your first time as a parliamentarian, this role is actually a continuation of a distinguished career as a civic leader promoting equality and empowerment for Arab citizens, women, and marginalized populations, including 10 years as founding director of Injaz, the Center for Professionalization of Arab Local Governance. So today we get the benefit of your insights, both as a political leader who entered the Knesset at this unparalleled time, and as a civic leader and expert who has your pulse on the changing aspirations and horizons for Arab citizens. So now to my question. With 8 parties spanning left to right, this government coalition is the broadest perhaps in Israel's history. It also marks the first time that an Arab party, led by Mansour Abbas, is part of a coalition. On one hand, this inclusion is celebrated as heralding a new era in Israeli politics for Arab citizens. Yet in the wake of recent events, many are wary that this coalition, which is so vulnerable to principled disagreements among its members, can withstand national crises like the one seen in May. What do you make of this moment? Is this a new era for Arab citizens in Israeli politics? What is the feeling as an Arab MK inside the Knesset today? And how does this compare with the feeling and discourse on the Arab street?
Okay, so thank you very much. Good morning, good evening. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Mr. David, for the invitation, and Liron for a very, very good friendship. Let me just say the beginning and the following, that first of all, MK Isaw Frej, who is my colleague in Meretz party, is now also the Arab minister at this government, and these are really truly wonderful news. And in addition, I would be the deputy to the Knesset chair, and this is for the first time ever an Arab woman to be appointed as deputy to the chair, the president of the Knesset. To answer the short question the short answer to your question, Liron, is yes. The longer version would be yes, indeed, this is a new era in Israeli politics. I think that we are in one specific point in history in the state of Israel, where we can see the beginning of a true, genuine partnership on the political level between Arabs and Jews, citizens of the state of Israel. And I want to just tell you a little bit about the background of this. I don't want to say the highlight, because I want to truly emphasize the point that it is the beginning of a process that started from my perspective years ago, and started I think a decade ago, where more and more Arab Palestinian citizens of the state of Israel had came up into a realization that until we can enter and influence from the inside, on the economical level, on the social level, on the political level, in the Israeli society and in the Israeli governmental and official circles of decision, we cannot really make a real true difference and change in our reality. This is one really fundamental realization made mainly by younger generation, professionals, middle class, that started to understand the importance of what does it mean to be a citizen of the state. So this is a much more process like development that I think it was realized within the last decade. The second one was a much more rapid change that started 2 years ago, when for the first time ever an Arab political party that is coming from the from the mainstream of the Arab politics in Israel, which was called the Arab Joint List, that included 4 Arab political parties, including now Ram. Ram was part of this joint list. And that joint list in 2018 and then in 2019 decided that they want to announce that they are pro Gantz to be the prime minister of the state of Israel. Now, if you look even deeper on that moment, you could see that within this specific moment, the Arab Joint List and specifically Balad political party within this Arab Joint List. And Balad is like the extreme right wing in our politics. They are pan-American, pan-Arab, pan-nationalists, and they believe in their ideology. They believe in all citizen one-state solution, etc., etc. And at the end of the day, they recommended Gantz. And Gantz is not a usual, Jewish citizen. He was, he was the head of the Israeli army, and they decided that they want to recommend him. So that made one major taboo to be broken. Another major taboo that was broken is that for the first time ever, the mainstream of Jewish politics started to realize the potential of the Arab politicians into the game of politics, and that it is okay to have Arab political parties to be part of the coalition. That, of course, led Benjamin Netanyahu to say that he wants to see Ram as part of the coalition. And that led us to where we are now. Ram is a full partner, even though they are not part of the government, but they are part of the coalition, and also within their own agreement with the government, they have potentially the ability to be in the government itself. And although it's a complex situation, it's the Middle East.
I just wanted to quickly jump in, and maybe many people on the call will be familiar with the story you're saying, but I'm going to summarize it in about 10 seconds, which is to say, the joint list was formed in 2015. It was led by Ayman Odeh, and over the course of its progression, Ayman Odeh set forth a vision and really got the tailwind of Arab society behind him to say Arab citizens want to be part of national decision-making circles, part of politics. And in a sense, this was dovetailed with the idea that for the change bloc, there was no way for the change bloc to create a change administration without partnership with the Arab citizens who make up 16% of Israel's electorate. And then over the last, after they recommended Gantz, which was a very big watershed moment for the Arab society to do, and then they were rejected. In a sense, there was a disappointment, and Mansour Abbas entered the stage saying, you know what, we can take this a step further, even we can make pragmatic relationships. And he formed a relationship with Netanyahu, even saying, let's get to change for Arab society wherever we can. And then ultimately partnered with a change bloc as well, which is another interesting twist. I think that Mansour Abbas, and maybe I can, I'm gonna throw in a question for you, Diane, there, because Ram has been promoting a pragmatic message all along, saying, it's possible to partner just on burning issues of Arab society, make sure we get budgets, make sure we get address rising crime, speaking to the immediate needs and frustrations of Arab society. And this got him the last push to enter a coalition, which was difficult for the joint list. Yet in the wake of these escalations, and in a minute we'll also turn a similar question to Meir, in the wake of these escalations is the pragmatic message, Islam's pragmatic message, as resonant with Arab society as it was just a few weeks before these escalations. And I'll say, David said this a little bit, but these escalations were spiraling out of of provocations that happened in East Jerusalem connected to the wider Palestinian identity and sense of justice, and then erupted within Arab society, in a sense, conflating the issues of civil justice with national identity.
Well, I would like to try to answer this and give it a much broader view. You know, throughout the last 2 weeks, people, you know, whether in the media or our other organizations, asking me about the you know, the Arab the future of the Arab Jewish relations, mainly after the escalation that happened in the last month. And people are asking me whether I think that things will get back into normal. And my answer is, of course not. I'm definitely convinced that if we want to make sure that there is a solid, genuine, sustainable future relation between Arab and Jewish communities in Israel, we need to start working into building new partnership between both communities. And what do I mean by that? I think that, you know, I always say that if you look at what has been so far, there has been a much more solid partnership between Arabs and Jews, mainly in the health system, you know, doctors, Arab doctors working and Jewish doctors working together in the governmental, etc., etc. But I believe that it is it's one step towards change. I believe that if we want to see a much more sustainable change, we need to do a much more deeper partnership in the coming sense. I believe that Israeli politics until now of 2021 is comprised of politics of identity. You know, you have political parties for Arabs and political parties for Russian speakers and political parties for Haredim and for Ashkenazim, etc., etc. And this is okay because, you know, apparently we need politics of identity. I come from politics of identity. You know, I do not say that I'm only a citizen of the state without no notions of me being part of, you know, the Palestinian people, historically speaking, or being a part of an ethnic minority as an Arab citizen of the state. But I believe that in the coming years, politics of identity will not be sufficient. It could be one floor or one ground that is here to stay, that should not be deleted, but we need to start building the second floor in Israeli politics. And the second floor goes into the answering the following question. For us Arabs, what does it mean to be an Israeli? A part of paying taxes or voting in the Knesset or abiding the law. But also for Jews, what does it mean for you to be an Israeli beyond being a Jew? And this is something that usually, mainly for a much more secular, but also for religious communities within the Jewish communities, question. And I believe that starting a conversation on the political level, on the civil society level, on the academia, into economical circles, etc., into trying to answer these questions, we will start having a much more wider content into building this second floor. And this second floor for me is the starting or the beginning of an answer of what does it mean a political partnership between Arabs and Jews that is much more sustainable and much more solid.
Thank you. I think there's a lot to dig in there, but I want to turn over to
Yes.
Dr. Meir Elran, and I really appreciate your
Thank you.
thoughtfulness. Meir, you're a retired Brigadier General. You became senior researcher at INSS following a distinguished 24-year career in the IDF's Military Intelligence Directorate and subsequent work at the Tel Aviv municipality and with government ministries. You're also an academic teaching international relations at the University of Chicago and heading the Department for National Security at Sapir Academic College. A question, as head of the program on Arab citizens in Israel at the INSS, you have long made policy recommendations that focus on closing socioeconomic gaps and improving integration and inclusion of Arab citizens as an urgent Israeli domestic priority. Most recently, in your analysis of recent events, you wrote that these riots did not emerge in a vacuum. What do you see as the underlying causes and triggers for these events? How do they affect your analysis of Jewish-Arab relations in the country? What challenges do they and the risk of additional outbursts presents for the new coalition, and specifically to the unique position of Mansour Abbas? I'm sorry I'm speaking so fast. I will try to slow down. What challenges do they and additional outbursts present to the new coalition and to the unique position of Mansour Abbas? Please.
Thank you very much, Liron, for having me, and I really appreciate and congratulate the member of Knesset, Ghaida, for her new position, a very important one, and we're looking forward to the future. In the meantime,
Yes, thank you.
Start answering your very complex question by referring to the actual situation in which we find ourselves present. I would suggest for everybody to understand that we are presently standing in a crossroad, which is very critical, very sensitive, I would even say very dangerous, but also very significant in the sense that if we manage our progress in this particular unique, I would say, crossroad, it can also be a huge opportunity for the state of Israel in terms of one of the most important issues in Israeli society, which is the relations, the very complex relations between the Jewish majority and the Arab minority. In order to understand what it means to be in such a crossroad, I would like to share with you my understanding of the background in which we are finding ourselves present. First of all, I would like to say that this background is layered, very complex, very conflicting in nature, and it goes on already for a very long time, most of the time. And I would like to present to you very shortly 6 major issues that actually impact this particular complex and complicated background. Number one, we have to remember that the core business of the relations between the majority and the minorities in Israel is the historical conflict going on now for more than 100 years between the Jews and Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs in our country. It goes and it comes back, and it goes and comes back. It has peaks and low points, but it continues. And we have to remember that the Palestinian Israeli citizens are part and parcel of the Palestinian people. And when we want to see how we bridge the gaps between us, we have to understand and appreciate the past, the history, and its sensitivities based on the long enduring and ongoing conflict, which is not being on the way soon, anytime soon, to be bridged or resolved. This is unfortunately the situation. We all hope it will change for the better, but so far it does not. Number one. Number two, we have to be aware, very cognizant of the conflicting narratives, historical narratives between the Jews and the Arab, the Jews and the Arabs in Israel. And this does not help. The narratives are conflicting in nature. And for us, for example, the most important thing for us, the inception of the establishment of the state of Israel is for our Arab citizens associated with a disaster, with the Nakba. And this is a total conflict of narratives. Number three, on top of those two, we have the ongoing state discrimination against the Arab citizens in Israel in terms of education, employment, residence, infrastructure. This is not a very optimistic background for us to look forward to our future. Fourth, it's not just the state that has discriminated the Arabs residents. It's also the position of most of the Israeli governments since the establishment of the state in 48 until pretty much recently. And this is based and supported by an attitude, an approach, an alienating approach on a large part of the Israeli Jewish population. The thing is the very profound religious element in both societies. Both the Arabs and the Jews in Israel are indeed to a large extent religious, or what we call at least Mesorati, traditionalists in terms of our religious inclinations. And within that, we have a central role for Jerusalem, for the holy places, all kind of different ethoses that for secular people are not really understood sufficiently. And of course, on top of all those layers, we have the political setting, which is based on a very interesting commonality between Jews and Arabs in Israel. And this is the disputatious character of the Israeli politics. Very much similar to the situation in the Israeli political scene. Also, the Arab political scene is fragmented to the extent of being hostile within the two communities. To that situation, we have to understand that at least the Arabs, for a very clear and good reasons, they can be typified, the majority of Arabs, as ones who are searching for, striving for integration, social integration, economic integration, and presently also political integration in the Israeli fabric. This is a very clear inclination, policy, attitude on the part of the Arab citizens. Not all of them, but I would say that more than 75% of the Arabs express their willingness and interest to integrate into the country, to the extent that they want to be part of the country, with all due respect to their association with the Palestinian people outside of Israel. So the big question is, in this situation, under this background, where are we standing presently? And indeed, the last month has been a very critical test in our relations, as we have seen merging together one positive and one negative phenomena that really shape the present situation in our country. Number one, the unfortunate, I would say even to a large extent unprecedented, riots between Jews and Arabs, mostly in the mixed cities within Israel, that brought about a very, very serious, I think, crisis, clashes and crisis between Jews and Arabs in Israel. People are not just concerned about it, but they're also afraid. And as you can understand, fear does not serve as a very positive kind of a lead to the future. So we are still presently situated in a situation in which Jews and Arabs are afraid of each other, very suspicious of each other, but at the same time, looking for solutions, looking for ways to bridge the gap that has erupted in a very violent manner between the two communities. So this is the negative setting in the present. On the other side, at the same time, in the same weeks, we have seen the establishment of this kind of a very, very important, historical, I would say, association in the political sphere between Jews and Arabs, which is very, very delicate, very sensitive, not very stable. The political situation in Israel is not stable at all. We are still within the political crisis that elapsed already for more than 2.5 years. So the big question now is, once we understand that we are in this kind of a crossroad, what comes next? What is stronger? What are the trends and features that are stronger? Is it the idea of integration, joint integration based on equality, recognition of the needs and identities of the two sectors? Or are we going down the slope with violence, with hatred, and with fear? The jury is still out. I cannot stand here before you and suggest for you what the future would be. But I would say that the bright future of bridging, of integration, is possible to my understanding. This is something that can happen if we, both Jews and Arabs, unite in the understanding that we are different, we have a different history, we have different needs, we have different identities, very complex ones, but we can do it together. And it is in the basic interest, both of the Jews and of the Arabs, and I think that it's also a basic interest for the state of Israel. It is vital, it is critical for the state of Israel that the Arab population will be totally integrated economically, socially, and politically in the Israeli fabric. This is the key, the most important key, not the only one, but the most important key for Israel to thrive, to prosper, to get out of the coronavirus pandemic, go out of the political crisis, the economic crisis, the social crisis in which we find ourselves presently. This is a major key. And I think that there are ways to use this key properly, positively. And I think that if you want me to go further, I'd be glad to give some ideas what actually needs to be done in order to make this vision actually happen.
Thank you. I think we definitely want to hear this. I want to interject to just say, along with the mapping that you gave of the situation, I think you also gave a very robust context for just how unique and, in a sense, the position of an MK like Ghaida Zoabi, to be an Arab woman MK on the precipice in an intersection, like as an individual who's in this position, I think Meir, you inadvertently also provided the context of explaining just where Ghaida is situated. And before we come back, because my next question to both of you was what should be done, I want to ask Ghaida to say a few words about being at this intersection of forces, the conflicts within Arab society about what should be done next, about whether it's possible with a Palestinian identity, with an Arab citizen identity, and also respond to some of the comments on the Q&A that are saying it's not all bad. We've also heard of people really extending, reaching their hands out to each other, Jews and Arabs, through marches for coexistence. And I know you took part in that personally. So maybe if you can say a few words about that, and then we'll come back to ask both of you about what should be done.
Well, let me just start by saying that I'm not naive, but I'm optimistic. And I'm optimistic because I don't have the privilege of not being an optimist. You know, if you are an agent of change or political change, you have to wake up every day, every morning and say, okay, I have one thing to change today. However, there are several moments in each day that comes up with a very conflicted issues. For example, what's happening today in Jerusalem, where right-wing, how do you say, the right-wing flag, Israeli flag march to be coming through East Jerusalem. For me, as you know, as a Palestinian Arab citizen of the State of Israel, that believe in the importance of ending the occupation and establishing the state of Palestine, beside, you know, in addition to the Israeli state. This is something that is, for me personally, is a very difficult decision that has been taken by the Israeli government, which I am part of. On the other hand, I understand that you know, this government was established, the new government was established. It wasn't established on, you know, just to say that we don't want the previous Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to stay in governance, but we mainly established this government because we want to see democracy strengthened. We want to see a much more inclusive politics to be made rather than inclusive. And I know that, you know, Dr. Meir talked about conflicting narratives. Today is a very conflicted narrative. But you know, for me, I understand the importance of the historical point of you know, a point in time, and this is something that I think that the vast majority of my community of the Arab minority in Israel understand. I want to say to include also two things in this conversation. One, when we talk about you know, what has been very you know, seen in the relations between Arabs and Jews in Israel, usually what we saw is that, you know, people from Kfar Saba, which is a well-established, rich Jewish city, coming in the weekend to Kfar Qasim, which is you know, an Arab city near Kfar Saba, which is like most of the Arab cities, much more poor, much more poorer city. People from Kfar Saba coming to Kfar Qasim in the weekend, buying things, going to the restaurants, eating hummus, feeling nice about themselves, and then getting back to Kfar Saba and forgetting about the difficulties that they have seen and they hadn't really thought about. Because what happens is that for the vast majority of the Jewish majority, the Jewish citizens, usually people think of the Arab cities and the Arab citizens as the you know, the backyard. And when you think about people as the backyard, you don't really think about themselves, about them. And what I want to see in the future relations, when I talk about a much more sustainable, genuine partnership, is that to make sure that when we talk about people coming from Kfar Saba to Kfar Qasim, they understand that they need to have what I call a solidarity between citizens. And going back to the second floor on political partnerships, I think that this is some sort of an example. The other kind of groups within the Jewish citizens and mainly politicians but it's a much more smaller group, is that you can see that there are politicians from the Jewish political parties or decision-making circles that deep down, they think of us as fifth column. And until this issue is raised, is talked about, and is cleaned, we cannot really move on. Dr. Meir, mentioned it when he talked about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I want to highlight the issue of mistrust, because if you do not trust your partner, civil partner, you cannot really build a partnership with them. I want to say also that there are opportunities. One is that what we saw in the last year of the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords, we saw that I saw that that within the Arab society, there were a lot of people that thought that they can be, they can be partners in economical level or in a social level into realization of the Abraham Accords. I think and I believe that the Arab society in Israel can be a true, I don't want to use the word bridge, but can be a true partner in making a realization of the Abraham Accords, because at the end of the day, we are a creation of both worlds. We are the creation of the democratic Western culture, but we are also the creation of the Middle Eastern Muslim Arab culture. And this is something that is unique. And if the Israeli decision-making circle understands the potential of this, I think that we can play a major role in the future of this region.
So an opportunity for Arab citizens within to really be a bridge, yes, as many people have been dreaming for a long time. Thank you. I want to Meir, take you up on your offer to say, to lay out what you think needs to be done. I want to point out that there's many questions in the Q&A about the role of extremism. And I don't know if in your suggestions what needs to be done, you can also address the role of extremism and what can be done about that on both sides.
Absolutely. So let me try now to say a few words about the direction, the strategic directions for progress. First of all, we have to understand that it's not a one-way street. I think that first of all, it's the responsibility of the state of the government to take care of the issue of relations between Jews and Arabs. I'm all for, a popular kind of a civic kind of a engagement. This is very, very important. But basically, in the state of Israel, as in other countries, I think the most important role is for the government to push forward. So this is the responsibility of the government. I am looking forward and expect this present government, more than the previous government, to push forward and to make this kind of a bridging between the Jews and Arabs in Israel. So this is number one. What I think should they do is more simple than complicated. I mean, it's not as complicated as the background that I was talking about. So I want to make a differentiation on two levels or two spectrums. Number one, I want to say about what the government of Israel needs to do as far as the Arab minority is concerned. And then I want to say a few words about what the government needs to do about the Jewish sector in Israel. Let's start with the first. Two most important things. Number one, to recognize if we want to collaborate, or we want the Arabs to collaborate with the Israeli Jewish majority, we need them to make the leap forward in the social and economic status that they are in. This has been recognized also by the previous government. with the 922 5 years program that was passed in December of 2015. Now we are talking about 923, which is the next one, next stage forward. Everybody in the government is in concert that it has to be adopted, it has to be implemented in a big way based on the lessons. And we have very important lessons of the previous plan. The previous plan was successful, generally speaking, but not sufficiently so. So we need to use this opportunity to forward the chances for the Arab minority to go forward in its social and economic issues, both in terms of education, employment, and welfare, and also
housing. And housing.
also infrastructure, absolutely. Infrastructure, from roads to dwellings, no doubt about it. And also the issue of the lands, mostly in the Bedouin community in the south. This is number one. This is a major issue. There is an agreement, a basic agreement about that. So that's why we can be a little bit optimistic about this one. The second issue that the government has to take responsibility for is to combat the crime and violence within the Arab community in Israel. This has become a pandemic, okay? A pandemic in Israel. And it's not an Arab issue, it's an Israeli issue. And we need to take responsibility. And there are already plans within the government based on a decision by the director generals of all the ministries in Israel that are relevant for this problem, together with the police department, on two major issues. Number one, enforcement, equal and efficient enforcement. And number two, social responses, because the problem, everybody understands that crime is rooted in social situations. So those two things, if we really make progress, and we can do that on those two issues in the next term of this coming in government, it will really be able for us to change the basics of what we want to see as an integration from the Arab side. Because in terms of their awareness, they are there. The Arab population is there. With one caveat, which I need to say, I said before that about 3/4 of the Arabs are moderate, pragmatic, and willing. We still have a minority, but sometimes not a very small minority, of people who oppose this kind of a policy or an attitude. And some of them, because of different reasons, either associated with the level of crime or associated with the unemployment and other things, tend to be really mostly youth that are radicals, that are prone to violence, and they are the ones who spearhead the riots that we saw in the next series. So there are still problems, major problems, but I think that they can be dealt with properly and in an orderly manner. This is as far as the attitude that needs to be taken, or policy needs to be taken by the government starting tomorrow. The second issue, of course, is with the Jewish community. In the Jewish community, there is one major problem, and this is the problem of mistrust. Okay? Still in Israel, many Jews, I would say a majority, I would dare saying a majority of the Jews are still very apprehensive. And this is a kind word as far as the Arab population in Israel is concerned. And there is a long way for us to go forward in order to make it clear for the Jews in Israel that the Arabs are our partners. We have an obligation for them in terms of not only in moral way, in terms of morality of a democratic country, but also because of our interests. Okay? And if we understand that we depend on them as much as they depend on us, and that they are willing to collaborate with us, and they have proven that for a very long period of time. Okay, let's be aware of that. Then I think the way will be paved. But there is again a problem here. And this is the problem of politics. We have to understand that the fear of many Jews in Israel, when they look at the Arabs, okay, is based on a sense of alienation, which has been nurtured by politicians in Israel. It's time for us to stop that and stop it now. Okay, so those are the two things that we need to do in the Arab sector. Those are the things we have to do in the Jewish sector. And I think and hope, I'm not sure about that, but I think and hope that the present government will go further, a very, robust step forward in the plans that already exist and are agreed upon in the political echelon, and to go further, as I said, starting tomorrow, to build the new structure of jointness, of working together, because let's face it, okay, if you work with Arabs, if Jews work with Arabs in the same environment, in the same place, okay, they know them, they know each other, they understand their weaknesses and strengths. This is basically the best way to move forward.
We only have 7 minutes left, and so I want to invite Ghaida to respond to, I think, some of your comments about couching the radical versus mainstream desires among Arab youth, and then I want to combine it with a question to both of you to close, because we've had quite a few questions about this in the Q&A, and brings the conversation full circle. Both of you acknowledge that a lot of the tensions today that are now surfaced are connected to the fact of the conflict. And I think you said it this way, Meir, it's far from over. Can you connect the dots? How you see addressing the pragmatic needs inside, addressing integration of Arab citizens inside the country? How can you connect the dots? How this also speaks to, I think, Ghaida, you talked about the potential of Arab citizens to be a bridge. Can you articulate a little bit about how this, without a proximate solution to the conflict, how this also moves us forward in that regard? So Ghaida, please, you, and then Meir close.
Okay, thank you. I want to just focus a little bit about what Dr. Meir said regarding extremists from you younger people coming from our community in the last events. First of all, I think that Dr. Meir agrees with me that we have extremists from both sides. The Arab society in Israel is really similar to in its components to the Jewish community in Israel. However, at the real beginning, the early days of the events, what happened is that young people went to demonstrations to demonstrate against Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and other extreme right-wing politicians going to East Jerusalem and going to Sheikh Jarrah and making a real, picking on the status quo and challenging the status quo. And I can tell you a personal side. My son, 18 years old, at the first 2 days of what happened, went with his friends to demonstrate in Nazareth. And the second night, his parents, me and my husband, at 4 o'clock in the morning, we didn't know what happened with him, and it was a real nightmare that night. When he got back finally to the house, he told us that there are a lot of police force aggression against demonstrators, that instead of the police forces letting people to demonstrate, what is, demonstrations, to demonstrate in Israel, this is, you as a citizen have the basic tool of making your opinion. But if you look deeper, you can see that police forces had played and still is playing a very, very negative role, and is feeding the mistrust issue between the Arab society and the state in general. Police aggression, police violence, police neglect. When Dr. Meir talked about the issue of crime and aggression within our cities and towns, we're talking about the fact that when there is a gun shoot at your neighborhood in Nazareth, and you're calling the police, and the police are saying to you, we cannot do anything about it until things are calm, and it would take them sometimes 4 or 5 or 6 hours to get to the neighborhood. This is our daily reality. On the other hand, I truly believe that, yes, I will just end this because this is important for me to say the following. I believe in the importance of the role of the modeling role of politicians. It is important that we can see people from both sides, Arabs and Jews, working together, studying together, etc., etc. It's important, but it's not enough. What we need to see is that more politicians saying that we trust you and we want you to take part into building the future with us of the state. And this is a very, very important message to be delivered by Jewish politicians.
Thank you. Meir, you have the last 95 seconds.
That's easy. Okay, I want to answer the question about the impact of the overall dispute between Israel and the Palestinians on the domestic issue. Unfortunately, I can suggest, and I hope that I'm wrong, that we are not in the opening stage of major discussions and negotiations between us, Israel, and the Palestinian people, be it the PA or Hamas. The complicated situation is going to last, and the fact that we have Hamas on one hand, we have the PA with the Mahmoud Abbas on the other hand, and we also have the Israeli government, which is not possible for it to start, getting into the very core issues about, politics, including the issue of the dispute between us and the Palestinians. Those components do not give us much hope for a major breakthrough in the overall context of the Arab-Israeli conflict. However, this is my second point. Despite of the significance of this possible setting, which I leave for the future, I would like to say that we are not in the context of the relations between Jews and Arabs in Israel, we are not totally dependent on the external issue. We can make major progress, in the present circumstances if we march forward in the issues that I have been trying to describe to you formally. So I know that it is relevant, but it's not really dependent on one or the other. So It's not very, favorable, but it's possible.
Thank you. And I wish we had more time to explore each of your insights, but I'm going to hand it over to David to close and just thank you both so much.
Thank you, Liron.
And
Thank you
I
very
do want to thank Dr. Elran and member of Knesset Zoabi for your insight and your patience with us. And this is certainly informative and thought-provoking conversation, and hopefully it will continue. We appreciate your remarks and for spending the day with us, and want to thank all the viewers for also taking the time for today's presentation. If you found today's webinar informative, we hope that you will join us for future JCPA webinars and consider making a donation to JCPA to support future programming. For more information, please visit jewishpublicaffairs.org. And thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon.